have Professor Paul Robert Magocsi, who is Chair of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Toronto. This is the first of two sessions basically about the field of Ukrainian studies. But we're going back in history, and we're using the occasion of the latest publication by Professor Magocsi on becoming a Ukrainianist, which is available for free at the registration table. So it's an exploration, it's a reflection on Ukraine, on the history of Ukrainian studies in North America through the life and experience of Professor Magocsi, so autobiographical. We will hold a session entirely in conversational style between Professor Magocsi and me. And I trust that it will be illuminating. Before I begin, since we have an international audience who should not be entirely up to speed with just the landscape, institutional landscape of Ukrainian studies in North America, there is I don't know if it's the mothership, but it's the first major institution was at Harvard University, created in 1968. The Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, which early on was simply called the Ukrainian Institute, I believe. So going on 51 years, there is the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies in Edmonton, Alberta, in this great country of Canada, created in 1976. We will talk about that as well. There's the Chair of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Toronto, which was created in 1980. That's 39 years ago. And the list of shareholders remains at one. Professor Magocsi has been appointed in 1980 in rather controversial circumstances. That will be one of the topics of the discussion. So my modest chair here comes much later as kind of the latest kid on the block, but we will be mostly focused, although we will be talking a bit about the post-communist era, particularly in this experience of the 70s and 80s. So Professor Magocsi actually came to Harvard in the late 60s. So when we talk about the creation and the development of an institute, he was both an active participant, but also an interested observer. So the first question would be, how did you get to Harvard? What led you to Harvard in 1969? How did that happen? You need to use the microphone.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. The answer to that question is very simple. I was, to use a more recent term, I was headhunted, namely when the Harvard program was initiated, or the idea of it was that of Professor Omeryan Pritsak, and he already in the late 60s, just after he had left the University of Washington, where he was, I think, until 1966, had gone to Harvard and immediately had as his lifetime goal, to create some kind of program. It wasn't clear exactly what it was, in Ukrainian studies at a major university. And in any case, that idea had been rolling around among the Ukrainian community in the United States, in particular among former students at Columbia University. So it wasn't his idea originally, but he latched on to that idea and then decided that he would try to establish a program, and most specifically, at least one chair, endowed university chair at Harvard. But aside from creating an endowed university chair, he wanted to find a cohort of younger scholars, potentially creating a new corpus of cadres, if you will, young cadres of Ukrainianists that would be trained under his direction or at other universities. And so he looked around the country, literally. And he first contacted me via letter in 1967. And that began a process of interacting with him that lasted, well, 4 years until I came to actually Harvard. I actually came there physically in 1971 because I was completing my doctoral dissertation at Princeton at the time, and I didn't want to, he wanted me to come to Harvard and just drop Princeton, which I would never do. So I finished at Princeton, and then I came to Harvard. And I was one of those 5 or 6 of us who were literally brought there to create this new cadre of Ukrainianists. So that's how I got to Harvard.
Can you say a few words about the reputation or stature of Omelian Pritsak as a scholar?
Well, first of all, he was not a Ukrainianist per se. He was a Turkologist and was a specialist in Turkic dialects among the steppe peoples of Central Asia. The whole area running, for all intents and purposes, from Mongolia to the Crimean Khanate. But he was born and raised and educated in Galicia during the interwar years under Polish rule. Came out of a family that was a patriotic Ukrainian, and got very good training in Germany during the wartime, during the war years. And his experience with Turkology opened him up to the Ottoman world, and he became convinced very early on that to be a historian of Ukraine, if one wanted to be serious, one would need to break the old paradigm, which still has not been fully broken, that Ukraine is seen in the context as kind of mirror or a subordinate component of either the Russian world or the Polish world, namely the links when one, in fact, most Ukrainian historians do this, and most students of Ukrainian culture do this, it's the links always to the north, forgetting that for at least a millennium, the lands of Ukraine looked southward, toward the Black Sea, and certainly toward the center of civilization at the time, Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire, which then was replaced by the Ottoman Empire, which continued to play an exceedingly important role in the history of present-day Ukrainian lands. And yet that whole kind of relationship was next to understudied. Pritsak was influenced very strongly by Atanahil Krimsky, who was one of the first Orientalists in Ukrainian scholarly world. And so he made a point that anyone who wanted to be a serious historian of Ukraine must know Turkish, and not just simply modern Turkish, more importantly, Ottoman Turkish. And so, and he as a Turkologist brought these 5 or 6 of us there. Only 3 of us actually were subjected to studying Turkish, modern Turkish and Ottoman Turkish, that is Subtelny, Haida, and me. I lasted 1 year and that was it. But I did learn how to write actually in Persian script, as we would say backwards. They would say normally in the right way. That's how his profession had an impact on trying to redirect the focus on the history of Ukraine away simply and exclusively from the connection with Russia, the connection with Poland, but the connections with the Ottoman and Crimean worlds.
You said you were in touch by letter, so in a different century, people were writing letters. But in your book, you indicate that, I believe in 1969, you met him in person at an event in New York, by a diaspora Ukrainian institute with this gentleman here. A picture, if you want to recreate a bit the scene for us.
Yeah. There seems to be a mix-up, and actually the mix-up began most recently in Ukraine when someone was writing an overly long introduction to a new Ukrainian translation of another book of mine, and mixed up these two things. That is the Ukrainian Institute, which is not a scholarly body. It is a kind of cultural center given to the Ukrainian community by some wealthy philanthropist. Phenomenal location. It's on Fifth Avenue. It's the old Stuyvesant Mansion, right diagonal from the Metropolitan Museum. You couldn't have better real estate. And the Ukrainians are right up there front, right here on Fifth Avenue in New York, right next to actually the French consulate. Not bad. And that is really a cultural center where they carry out cultural events. And the longtime director of that center, ever since World War II, until he died in 1978, was the gentleman you see there, who was actually Julian Ravai, who was from Transcarpathia, Subcarpathian Rus, member of the Czechoslovak parliament, and then became premier of the very short-lived Carpatho-Ukraine. That is not where I met Pritsak. Pritsak I met at the Shevchenko. There's two other institutions. There's the Ukrainian Academy of Arts and Sciences, and also the Naukovi Tovarystvo, Shevchenko Scientific Society. And I believe, if I remember correctly, I was invited to the Ukrainian Academy of Arts and Sciences, and he came to that, seeing that I was coming from Princeton, and I was talking about some kind of, I don't know, something to do with immigration, and so he decided to use that occasion to collar me in person, and that was. And I can't remember whether he wrote to me before by letter or just got me there first, and then we started correspondence.